This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. What I'm looking at today is Squid Game 2, directed by Hung Dong-hyuk. I enjoyed the first series of Squid Game, and not only because it revolves around people being forced to play children's games for their lives. What also appealed to me is that Squid Game is as if The Prisoner, the Patrick McGowan series that ran from 1967 to 1968, and 2000's Battle Royale had a baby. And I'm apparently not the only person who enjoys this series, because the first series of Squid Game was the #1 series in 94 countries. But there's potentially a spanner in the works, a fly in the ointment, if you will, because Squid Game 2 has to follow up upon a really well-received show. That's always difficult, because sequels have to strike a balance. They have to be familiar enough that the people who enjoyed the first one will like it, but different enough that it's going to not only bring in new audiences, but keep those same people engaged. For instance, William Friedkin's The Exorcist was a huge movie, and it is very much what exorcism movies are modeled upon to this day. But its sequel, Exorcist II: The Heretic, didn't quite resonate with audiences, and I get it. I enjoy Exorcist II: The Heretic, by the way. I think it's interesting, but I also understand that it's so different from the first movie in many ways that it alienated a lot of people. And apparently even the director himself, William Friedkin, was not particularly fond of it. Or, in more recent times, you can take a look at Joker: Folie à Deux, the sequel to Joker. I've seen neither of those movies because I don't really care about them. But the first Joker earned over $1 billion. It's a huge hit, and with its relatively small budget, made it even more so. The sequel, with a larger budget, didn't do particularly well. And I assume that Joker: Folie à Deux didn't do that well because it veered too far afield. From what I've heard, it's a musical, or musical adjacent at any rate, and that is not what the people who enjoyed the original Joker were looking for, which seems fairly obvious in hindsight. Now, that's not to say all sequels don't work out. Some do incredibly well. Aliens, the sequel to Alien, did very well, and there are tons of others. But conversely, a lot of them do not. And I have to say that Squid Game pulled it off. It manages to be familiar. It still sticks with the format of people playing children's games for money and their lives. But it's tweaked in certain ways that make it feel fresh. It doesn't, at least not to me, feel like I was watching season 1 all over again. The dynamics of certain characters have changed. The way it's shot have changed. Even the lighting in certain aspects have changed, making it feel, while not new, after all, it is Squid Game 2, making it at least engaging enough to keep you wanting to watch. As I mentioned before, Squid Game, in terms of how it's shot, how it looks visually, is more varied than the first. It feels somehow grittier, and the overall tone is shifted. The feel of the games is very similar, that's to be expected. But outside the games, in the real world, it feels different. And it becomes almost like a buddy cop series in that you have Seong Ji-eun and Hwang Joo-ho. Hwang Joo-ho is the policeman who was shot at the end of the first Squid Game, trying to find the island where it's being held so that they can stop it once and for all. Seong Ji-eun is bankrolling this search with the money he won from the Squid Game, which is kind of ironic. And when you extend this irony to the critique on capitalism, it seems to be saying to me, at any rate, that the problem is less due to the economic system in and of itself than how we allow it to run amok, which once again is a little more nuanced take, which we didn't see in the first series. Though, back to the main story, and as I mentioned, they're looking for this island, but the thing of it is, no one actually believes them. People are participating in this search because they're being paid to do it. But there are no traces of this anywhere, and everyone doubts that it's real. But once again, money talks. So they're going along with this search. But outside of the game itself, it is invisible. It just happens, and it is so under the radar. The series doesn't show them interacting with other levels of government beyond the local. But I get the feeling that very few people anywhere know that this exists, no matter how many people it seems to suck into it in any given year. I mentioned Patrick McGowan's The Prisoner, and this aspect of the island being outside anyone's cognizance is very similar to The Village in that series. Though the difference is that in the case of The Prisoner, outside the village was less important than number 6's efforts to escape from it. You never really knew what he was even escaping to, for that matter, only that it wasn't there. He was seeking to escape from where he was being held. But beyond that, it was thematically very similar. In the case of number 6, the whole point was freedom for freedom's sake. There was very little importance put on what he'd be doing once he left. Even his life was very sketchily outlined. What mattered most was freedom as a concept, while in the case of the first series of Squid Game, the outer world holds greater relevance than it did in The Prisoner. It was more real, and it's seen more often than I suspect the entire run of The Prisoner, which lasted for, I want to say, about a year. Though it was done primarily to establish why certain individuals were in the game. It was seen primarily through their interactions. Beyond that, you didn't see much of the local color if individuals who were going to be in the game weren't participating in whatever was going on. Now, that's very necessary for the first series. You have to establish who these people are and why what's happening is happening. But you can't do that for the second series because it would be redundant. It would be repeating what happened before. And luckily they don't do that. The angle that the series was working from is entirely changed. The bulk of the time outside the game is spent with Seung Ji-hun and Hwang Jun-ho as they are working together to gather resources and personnel to find the island where the game is held, as I said earlier. Though this search begins with a character known only as a salesman, who was the guy who was getting people in train stations to play games to recruit them for the Squid Game. And by the way, it's worth mentioning that the salesman is played by Gang Yu, who also was the lead in Train to Busan. Really good zombie movie. If you haven't seen it, it's excellent. And if you do catch it, I think it's on Tubi. Don't watch the dubbed version. Watch it in the original Korean with subtitles. It works out so much better that way. Now the thing about the salesman is that, at least for me, I found him more than he appears, yet less than he appears at the same time. Because he comes off like a sociopath with an Ayn Rand fixation. And so that was a little weird. It wasn't bad. It's just not the tact that I would have taken, because it revealed too much about the salesman, while at the same time revealing very little about him. It was more about the spectacle that this person is, more so than any real basis for what he did and what he clearly revels in doing. He just came off really weird. And as I said, it wasn't bad, it was just a little off-putting, not nearly as in-depth, considering what he does for the games, than I would have really liked to see. Though, the finding of the salesman establishes that the game is real, because if Seung Ji-hun was telling the truth about the salesman, he's probably also telling the truth about the game, because why would he make it up? As I mentioned earlier, no one outside the game knows that this island exists. And as a viewer, it was never so explicitly stated that no one knows that this island exists. In the first series, people would be recruited to play and they'd be taken to an island. But it was never said it was secret. I assumed it was, but it never explicitly laid that out. The second series does so, with the effort to find it and to convince people of it being an actual place. Unlike the prior series, the contestants are given an option to vote whether or not to continue playing. If you recall with the first series, once a game was completed, they just start playing another eventually, killing as many people as possible till one remained to win the money. In this series, they have the option after each game to leave. While at the same time people are still being killed off, there's at least the illusion of democracy and fairness. And I say illusion because the game caters to greed. It caters to people drowning in debt. And for them to quit without winning enough money would go against their being there in the first place. So what players in Squid Game 2 are doing is that even though they have the ability to vote to end the game, they're not. Because it's already established, as I said, these people have massive debts. And for them to leave would defeat the purpose. So they stick in there, thinking that it's always going to be someone else who dies and so on and so forth. It's kind of brilliant. And it goes back to the political philosophy underlining the show, namely the illusion of choice, which capitalism often gives us. Lots of empty choices which have no real meaning at the end of the day. Another way that Squid Game 2 differs from the first series is that there's more focus on individual guards. In the first series, we learned that certain guards are selling the organs of the players when they are killed. In Series 2, the harvesting of organs is still happening, but there's some guards who have issues with it on principle, and they are ruining the bodies. For instance, if someone's killed, they'll shoot them again, just to ruin the organs. And this is also causing friction, but it's switching the narrative somewhat as well. So we're starting to see more of what's motivating the guards, because keep in mind, the only people who really benefit from the game are at the top. Everyone else, every detail of their lives are being looked at. You're only allowed certain spaces in which to move freely. Once again, the capitalism analogy. So it works particularly well in feeling new and fresh, despite at the same time being very familiar. While Squid Game is likely to end with the destruction of the game, and hopefully the downfall of the people sponsoring it, those are very broad strokes. Like any television show, it's about the people and the drama and the conflict between them. And so this should be interesting. So what do you think? This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. Do you agree, disagree? Let me know down below. And as usual, consider a like, follow, or buy me a coffee.